I think one thing that we can do, and I'm guilty of not doing it, is when we are on the receiving end of that sort of unconscious bias, respectfully shine a spotlight on it. And when someone draws to our attention that we have done something that probably embarrasses us, right? There's a reason it's unconscious, that we allow ourselves to hear that message and to take it to heart and to make adjustments because of it.
Thanks for tuning in to Keep It Legal, the show where we break down concepts, litigation, and current events with our legal experts. I'm your host, Mark Anik. Joining us today is Courtney Ervin of Hicks Thomas LLP in Houston. Courtney, great to have you here with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Let's talk about you and what you do today and what you do every day. Let's assume that you and I are meeting for the first time, perhaps socially over a glass of wine. And I say to you, Courtney, what do you do? What's the answer to that?
So, the answer to that is that I'm a complex commercial litigator slash trial lawyer. And for the non law initiated, how I typically explain that is that when businesses have a dispute, that is the sort of work that I do. And so I'm typically on the defense side. Um, but really, in business disputes, I think that plaintiff versus defendant line that is often drawn in the legal world doesn't work the same. Um, when I'm a plaintiff, it's breach of contract. Sometimes we include business torts, tortious interference, breach of fiduciary duty. But most of the time, it is two businesses disagree on the interpretation of a contract that at one point they agreed on. And it's reached the point that the business folks can't reach an agreement on it themselves. And so they bring in lawyers to help resolve that. Currently, I actually have cases in federal court, state court, and in arbitration. So I practice in all jurisdictions.
Okay. You said non-law initiated, and that's your way of saying normal people who are not familiar with these terms, right? Also, you get points for answering with the words tortious and fiduciary in your first response. So I'm enjoying this already. We should say that you are at Hicks Thomas, and
Yes.
you are in the Houston office of Hicks Thomas. You are a partner there. And looking at your bio, you do an awful lot of, you mentioned business litigation, but you also do an awful lot of energy work. You do an awful lot of insurance work. Describe for me what that encompasses, just briefly, please.
So all correct, and I would still put those as subsets under the business umbrella. And so my insurance coverage work is I'm lead counsel within Texas, and then even sometimes on a national basis for one of the largest insurance providers in the country on their commercial general liability lines. And so that is where they are insuring businesses, and those businesses have suffered some sort of event that they allege is covered under the policy. And if I get involved, that means my client disagrees that it's covered. And so it's actually still a business dispute, although within the sort of confines of insurance law, which is a pretty specific niche practice. And then on, like you said, a lot of my other work is in the energy space. And so my clients run the gamut of the major oil and gas companies down to private equity backed production companies, the service providers. One of my first clients is actually a company that started out of the back of a pickup truck, and they build above ground steel storage tanks to hold energy products. With the advent of green energy, they've even broken into holding biofuels, which requires different strengths and requirements for the steel.
Well, that's fascinating. That's
It
another
is.
podcast unto itself. Just the whole notion of biofuels fascinates me. What is a biofuel, and how big a role will those play as we go forward?
I have had a chicken fat biofuel case.
A chicken fat biofuel. And what was the dispute?
So the dispute over that was the master services agreement. It got settled pretty quickly, but a large chicken provider, this was years ago, so really, nascent technology. And a large chicken provider thought that they found a great place for their leftovers and it would be a win-win for everyone. But I think when it came time to actually implementing it, it was pretty new technology and things went south. Although the business folks ended up being able to work it out.
All right. So that's a brief description of who you are and what you do. Do you like what you do?
I do. So I would say there are probably three things that make me like being a lawyer, and particularly the kind of law that I practice in, which is contested disputes. So one is just being competitive. So the contested dispute part of it is growing up as an athlete. I mean, I think there's a lot of symmetry between trial work and any sort of teamwork. We're all friends off the court, but when we're on the court, by God, I'm going to win, or at least I'm going to do everything in my power to win. So that's fun. And then the other piece of it, which is probably why my clients like me, is I enjoy helping people and solving problems. And working with people to do that. And that really is, we all have seen the stats on how many cases settle. So I would say that's most of what I end up doing is in sort of the problem solving space. And one of the things that I think is most enjoyable about being a commercial litigator is your clients are often lawyers as well. They're in-house lawyers. We have very similar backgrounds. We're speaking the same language and, we're working together to achieve the business objective of their client who is the business person.
When you grew up, did you always want to be an attorney?
Not at all. I, I'm trying to think back on what I did want to do. I think I spent all my younger years until I started practicing law, not sure what I wanted to do. I actually have a junior right now who's facing the same problem and is just beside herself that she doesn't know. And I keep telling her, it's okay, it'll work out. But I really landed in law school because I was a psych major and I didn't want to get a PhD in psychology. It was 5 years and the careers that came out of it, I didn't think would be satisfying for me. I did decently well on the LSAT, and I actually picked law because I thought if I didn't like it, I would have lots of options with a law degree. And so I feel, a lot of success is luck. And I would say a lot of my success started with the luck of I landed in a career that I very much enjoy, but it was luck, not some sort of strategy or purpose.
Well, but it may also have been luck that you were in a position to take very good advantage of.
Yes, yes, I think that that's true, and I did really enjoy law school. I succeeded in law school, and then, I've always of course, there's drudgery in any career, but, most days, I'm happy to be in the office.
Okay. You said that undergrad you were a psych major, so tell the truth. You're a trial lawyer now. Do you ever sit in court and use some of that psych background and start to diagnose or dissect people on the other side?
Yes. So I actually got a bachelor's of science degree in psychology. There aren't many of those. And that's a field that's really exploded over time. But we did a lot of it was focused on how the brain works. And from any career where you're dealing with people, so it's not just judges and juries, it's opposing counsel, it's persuasion. And in my free time, I actually like to read about these things too, but our minds make most decisions without our being aware of it because it's the only way we can function. If I had to think about how do I make my mouth work so that I can answer your question, but because of that, the ability to tap into people's sort of tendency to just keep doing the same thing the way they've always done it. I mean, yeah, I'm aware of it. I definitely pay attention to it.
Okay. Our minds make most decisions for us, so I can blame my mind for some of the things that I do incorrectly, perhaps?
I think that you should.
You said earlier, you and I are here in the middle of March, and March is Women's History Month, which was one of the reasons among your own self and your practice and your success at Hicks Thomas, but it was one of the reasons we wanted to have you join us so that we could talk about Women's History Month and get your perspective on that. You said you are lead counsel for one of the largest insurance companies around. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, more or less.
What does it say to you, and what should it say to all of us in the midst of Women's History Month that the lead counsel for that company is a woman?
Yeah. So lead counsel in Texas. I don't I don't wanna undercut. They have lots of lawyers that represent them all around. But yes, I mean, I'm trusted by them and, some other pretty large clients to be their first chair trial lawyer on pretty substantial matters. I think one of the interesting things about being in a minority class, whatever it is, in my circumstances, it's being a woman, is there is always the question of how does that play into your successes? I think the principal reason that I've succeeded is because of my skills on my own as a lawyer. I don't think you get a chance to sit at the table or put throw your hat into the ring or whatever you want to say if you can't meet those minimum qualifications, which is to be good at your job. And then I think that and that, this client in particular, as lots and lots of large companies now, and even small companies, but lots of companies now recognize and try very hard to have diverse teams from their vendors, which we would, service providers, which would include law firms, and also internally. And so over my career, I've seen a purposeful effort of Courtney, we think you're doing a great job representing us. We would like to find more opportunities to get you more involved. And I do think being a woman has been part of that because I already checked the box of I can do it, and then they can work towards their own internal objective, which is to have a more diverse workforce, which includes a representation of women on their trial teams. And then the other change that I've seen that I also think plays into this is more and more of my clients are women. More and more of the judges that I'm in front of are women. Jury pools are a lot closer to 50% women. And I think one of the reasons that clients want diversity within their workforce and those that assist them is because of the importance in having a team that represents who that team is facing. And so having a female trial lawyer when you're talking to a female judge, I mean, it's not a necessity, but it's something that people think about, and they think about because it does matter, even if it's on an intangible level.
Sure. I have spoken with other women trial lawyers, and they will say, some of them will say, there are not enough first chair women trial lawyers. Agree? Disagree?
I don't think you can disagree with it. I mean, the stats are what they are. There's not enough women at the top of what everywhere. I mean, you know, look at the US Supreme Court. It's still heavily male. That would be the very top court. Our trial courts, our family courts have been, more and more female over the last years. You've got very few, I shouldn't say very few, but there's still a pretty big gap between female equity partners and female partners. At the associate ranks, it's flipped. Interestingly, I think, especially in litigation. I mean, now that I'm at a litigation boutique, I see it more in litigation, but I've seen that across my career. It's more heavily women in litigation than in corporate. But as the ranks narrow and there are fewer and fewer people in those positions altogether, I mean, there are only 9 US Supreme Court justices in the entire world, the percentage starts favoring white men. And that still happens. And I imagine we're still decades away from having a representation at the very top that looks like our population.
And is that an issue with the law and lawyers and law firms, or is that an issue with society and business generally? I'm going to ask you to put on your philosopher hat.
Yes. If I could solve the problem, we at least wouldn't be talking with me as being a lawyer at Hicks Thomas. I think in my own personal views, I think that it's a multifaceted problem. I think some of it's time. I was probably in one of the earlier law classes that was 50% women, 50% men. And so there is a time function to this. I think what I see most in my career that is still a barrier for me as a woman would be what I would call unconscious biases that I I don't know that we'll ever be able to fix that. I think that is part of the human condition. I think the more that we shine a spotlight on it, and I think the more that each of us as individuals and women, I mean, I have unconscious biases that favor men over women as well. I mean, I've taken those tests where, you have 1 second to answer, and I was pretty shocked at how much the test says my unconscious bias favors traditional gender roles. But I think the more we shine a spotlight on it, the more we can be aware of it, because the answer is awareness.
Right, right. If we're having this conversation, it's a good thing that we're having this conversation, and perhaps people listen to what we're saying, and it makes them stop for a moment and think.
Yes, exactly.
You're a partner, you're an equity partner at a litigation boutique. And that's part of the delineation that you just drew for us, equity versus partners. And you have had the support, you've talked to me about it, of other men there at the firm and throughout the legal and business worlds. But you've also been in a position, and I want you to tell me the story, please, of being in a deposition and being the first person who arrived in the room. Tell the audience what happened.
Yeah, so I was not a partner at this point. I was a senior associate, and it was actually myself and a junior associate that was an African American woman. And we had gotten to the deposition early. There were 4 parties involved in this lawsuit. And so we were 2 of the lawyers that would be taking the deposition of a witness. And a gentleman showed up about 15 minutes
You're being
after we got
diplomatic. Go
there.
ahead.
After we got there and remarked, so the two of us were there, the court reporter was there, and the videographer was there, and remarked, "Oh, I didn't think I would be the first one here." And there was just this assumption that the two of us sitting there were part of the court reporter and or videographer staff, as opposed to two lawyers that were there to do the exact same job that he was.
And
um,
did you correct him?
I pointed out that that was not an accurate statement, and he was visibly embarrassed at his mistake. But it does go back to, I actually know this person. I've never told him. He doesn't remember that the first time he met me, that was how we met. And I've never raised it with him, but I know that he would be even more embarrassed now that he knows me. And that he would never have thought that he had that bias towards other women practicing law. Which goes back to this unconscious bias. I mean, I've gotten a lot of glasses of water for male partners that I feel pretty confident my male associates wouldn't have been asked to get a glass of water. I mean, there is definitely women play the house homemaker role in our careers as well as at our homes. There's just a tendency to ask, and you'll walk down the hall, "Oh, will you make a copy?" And again,
Really? Will you
"Oh,
make a
yeah.
copy?
Oh, yeah."
I'm the guy here expressing great surprise, right? Because I've been on the other side of that unconscious bias. Many years ago, I was telling Alyssa, our producer, I used to be a reporter, and I walked into a courtroom one day back east, and I'm in a suit and tie, and the court looked over its glasses at me and said, "Are you an attorney?" And I had to say, "No, Judge, I'm a reporter. I'm just covering this for such and such." And the assumption was, well, here's a white guy in a suit and a tie. Maybe he's a lawyer. Someone
Yes.
saw you and your colleague and figured you can't possibly be lawyers. When do we get past that, or do we?
It's I think representation really helps. The more that we see equal representation, and I'm glad that you brought that up. My husband is a stay-at-home father, and he is definitely, I hate to use the word victim, but definitely on the receiving end of lots and lots and lots of assumptions about that.
Give me an example.
From, while you couldn't have succeeded as your career, that's why, right? Like, this wasn't a choice, it was a lack of ability, or even more pejorative, laziness. Sort of an interesting view of stay-at-home dads sit around and watch football and drink beer, whereas stay-at-home moms go to the grocery store and do the laundry. And his day, I think, looks a lot more like a stay-at-home mom's than, I don't know, a dad on a normal Saturday. But I don't think it ever goes away, and I'll swing back to, this is the psychology bias in me. I mean, it takes a lot of effort to walk into a room and say, "Okay, that person who looks like XYZ, I'm gonna make an individual, just one time decision, thoughtful decision on who they are and what they represent." Instead, we go through life making these gross generalizations. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm regularly exhausted when my brain is doing all these things for me because of all the things that I do take the time. But I think one thing that we can do, and I'm guilty of not doing it, is when we are on the receiving end of that sort of unconscious bias, respectfully shine a spotlight on it And when someone draws to our attention that we have done something that probably embarrasses us, right? There's a reason it's unconscious that we allow ourselves to hear that message and to take it to heart and to make adjustments because of it.
And the key there, as you just said, is respectfully. It
Yes.
takes a great amount of tact to turn around in that situation and say to somebody, hey, I just want to mention this, right?
Yes.
You gave me a segue into a piece that you wrote last year for Best Lawyers. You are a best lawyer amongst your many other honors that I could read from your bio. And the piece is called The Breadwinner. And it's all about the dynamic that you were just discussing, that you are an equity partner at a litigation boutique, and your husband made the decision, himself a lawyer as well, at some point to stay at home and raise the two kids. Tell us about that. Tell us first, how did you arrive at that moment? Because it talks about the naivete that you had, that you thought, oh, we can both just continue being lawyers and raise kids.
We arose at that moment over a number of years, as one can imagine. We actually met our first year of law school and got married our third year of law school over spring break. And we were very naive on lots of fronts, but I think viewed that one of two things would happen. We would have equal careers, and that both of us being lawyers could give somewhere around 50% to our jobs and somewhere around 50% to our families and come up with 100% work and 100% family. But of course, that's not accurate at all. That's not how life works. And then I think we both assumed, I shouldn't say we both assumed, I assumed that if one of us took a step back, that it would be me. I was raised by a stay at home mom and, a dad who worked 80 hours a week and, was firmly in sort of the camp that that's what a family looks like. But very early on, we had pretty different careers. So I was at big law and he was at a small four-person firm. And I actually had a lot more support and flexibility within my firm to both work hard, but also take the time off that I needed to spend with our kids. So if somebody had to go to the doctor's appointment, I was the one that was able to do it. Whereas if he did any of those things, he would notice a hit to his career. I also, interestingly, my firm ended up on the front page of the Houston Chronicle pretty early in my career for matching New York salaries, which meant his boss learned how much I made.
Oh boy.
Uh-huh. And so came to the conclusion that my husband didn't need to make money. Back to sort of the things that you
Wow.
wouldn't think would happen that happened. So pretty early on in our career, my career trajectory, I wouldn't say was more secure, but had a much clearer path. I knew at 8 years, you come up for partner, you meet these metrics, and you can be on the list for partner, just those sorts of things. And he being in a much smaller firm that didn't work as much. And then as we both started getting busier and busier, and someone's career had to take a back seat financially, it made the most sense that it be his and not mine. And then I guess sort of the two things probably converged around the same time. We were both gearing up for trials. And as I say, the wheels fell off the bus. We had, I think, a 1 year old at the time, maybe 2 year old and 5 year old. We just had daycare. We didn't have a nanny. And it was clearly not enough. My parents were in town and able to help, but we were asking more of them than we should have been and that they wanted to give. And then I also was approaching my look back for partnership. And my husband, we ended up on a family trip with six lawyers. 3
Oh,
couples,
boy.
and I was the only woman that wasn't a partner yet. The other 2 women were partners, and the boys went fishing, and my husband came back and said, "I have to quit my job." And I said, "What do you mean you have to quit your job?" And apparently they'd had a very candid discussion, and actually both of those husbands work and still work. But my husband's takeaway, and I think there was some truth to this, was if I was going to make partner, I always had to say yes. I couldn't say, "Give me a second, let me make sure that I've got childcare help," and what have you. Um, and so he really was the one that pushed. Well, initially he was going to go part-time, but that I will officially take the back seat from a career standpoint and the front seat from raising our family and managing the household.
Which is an interesting dynamic here. I mean, as I read this piece, you don't sound as if you were walking around the house singing "I am woman, hear me roar." Maybe you were. He was the one who, at various times when you were saying, "Hey, maybe I want to spend more time at home," he was the one nudging you towards the partnership.
Yes, that is absolutely true. As any parent, I think, and mom who has a probably any job, but a job as demanding as practicing law knows, you make a lot of choices. And there's a lot of times that you're in the office and you question, is that where I should be? Am I making the wrong decision as a parent? And actually, my husband's was raised by a single mom who was a legal secretary. In fact, my first job, she was a legal secretary at a firm in the building. So we would sort of pass each other on the escalator going into work every once in a while. But she worked about 80 hours a week, sometimes more, to make ends meet so that her kids could live in a neighborhood and get to good schools. And so anytime I would lament my long nights and my circumstances, my husband would look at me and say, "We are so lucky. You're home way more than you give yourself credit for, and we have what we need. My mom did this to put food on the table. You do it, and then we take a vacation to Europe." And so it gave me a huge amount of perspective that I wouldn't have had if he weren't my husband. And he's never viewed us to be in competition in terms of succeeding as lawyers or succeeding in the workforce. He's happily pushed me ahead, and said, you're a great lawyer. You work really hard and you deserve this, and we can't both do it. And so I'll take care of the kids, and the kids are fine.
That's awesome.
It is.
You were saying there is the assumption, some people will make the assumption looking at your husband that he must be sitting around with his feet up drinking a beer and watching, NFL Network reruns. Are there assumptions that we make about the woman who makes the choice to be not at home but in the professional environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a pervasive assumption that you can't be a successful career woman and a successful mom. That there's only, and it's true, I mean, there's only 24 hours in a day. And I think there's a view that we put on ourselves. I mean, I certainly felt that way for many years. I questioned if I was making a decision that was harmful to my kids. I see all generations, mostly women. I think women are harder on other women about that than men.
You can't see
Uh,
this, but our producer, Alyssa Wolf, is shaking her head up and down. Yes, go ahead.
yeah, no, I mean, it's true. And I hope that that is something that we change as a society. There is, I was thinking about, as I was thinking about this podcast on my drive into work this morning, I was thinking about how I think one of the things that's made me a very successful lawyer is also one of the things that's made me a very successful parent. And that is whether you are my child or my client, you know I have your back. If you need me, I will answer to you. And we can do that. You know, it is, we're doing everybody a disservice by trying to balance our marriages and our work by percentage points. You know, it's not a 50-50 split to have a good marriage on who does the dishes and the laundry, etc. And it's true with work too. And I really think the most important thing for lawyers that are trying to do what I've done, and people trying to support lawyers who are trying to do what I've done, is to think about kind of your day, your week, your month, your year, and your decade in terms of how do you make it work. So I'll give you an example. When my daughter was born, she woke up very early in the morning, and would fall asleep pretty early. She'd fall asleep at like 6 p.m. So I actually would get up with her at 4 a.m., be at the office by 5:30, and would leave at 4 p.m. But I had a network in place that if something blew up at work and I needed to stay past 4 p.m., I could. And I remember the partner that I worked for, a male, white male partner that I worked for, when she was first born, asked me, "Tell me what your hours are again." And I immediately started apologizing. And he said, "Do not apologize." He said, "If it were up to me, you would work every hour of every day. I just want to make sure that I know." And that, I think, was one of the early things in my career that set it in motion. And he ended up being a huge sponsor of me in terms of making partner and even getting my first big client. But it was a symbiotic relationship. He respected, and I told him what I needed to be the kind of parent that would let me be the kind of lawyer he wanted me to be. And then he knew that even though I tended to leave at 4 p.m., if he needed me, I would stay late, and that my work wouldn't suffer because I was leaving at 4 p.m. And I've made macro and micro adjustments in my career. You know, now I've got teenagers. That looks different having teenagers. Being home on the weekend is more important. I regularly get phone calls at work from my kids. But it's being available for the people that need you most when they need you most. And most of the time, thankfully, they don't collide. If they did collide, and they have before, my family knows they come first, and I'm supported by a partnership and by colleagues that let me put my family first in those circumstances.
Can we also say, I feel obligated to say it, I want to know your thoughts on it, that all work is worthy, whether you're the person who is staying at home unpaid, with cash, or the person who is going into the office, all work is worthy.
Yes. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's definitely true. And I'm kind of early in my career, also early in my career. I remember driving into work lamenting that I was really busy and I was talking to my dad and that I wasn't home. And my dad actually pointed out, "Courtney, the fact that you're earning an income for your family is important." So it's interesting that you bring it up. It had never occurred to me. I mean, I know that sounds silly in hindsight, but it was like somebody pulled, the shades off of my eyes. I was like, that is true. It had never occurred to me that going to work every day as a woman was, in fact, providing something to my family. And then the flip side is exactly what you're talking about, which is the idea, whoever it is that's staying home. I mean, it's huge. I actually have a good friend that just got a job as a general counsel of a major company. Well, I say just, she's actually been there 2 years now, but she had her second child around the time that she got that GC role. And so her husband in the last 6 months has decided to stay home. As a family, they've made the decision to stay home. And we went and had dinner this week, and her husband was remarking that he didn't feel like he was doing that much. And she said, "You have no idea the load that has been lifted off me, that when the school calls or there's an email, that I don't have to take the time to look at it, to think about, are you going to do it? Am I going to do it? I just know that you're going to take care of it." And it is. It's a lot of work wherever your job is,
It
at home, at
absolutely
the
is.
office, a blend of the 2, and figuring out a support network that is more than just the family unit to help manage all those pieces is critical to success on both fronts.
Courtney, any big thoughts for you were a student a couple of years ago at the University of Houston Law Center. Let's say there's a young woman who is a student right now. Uh, any thoughts that you would pass along to her so that Alyssa and I can be ready to interview her 20 years hence and get her thoughts on Women's History Month?
Yeah, so I think I still see, and I see it, it's myself looking back at me, but there's a lot of trepidation for women and feeling like they can have it all and do it all. And how do they make the decisions on being able to have this picture perfect life that they're envisioning in their future? And I think the best advice I can give is spend less time trying to create what you think is the life you want in 5 to 10 years, and spend more time more in the here and now. I mean, it doesn't have to be minute by minute, but within this year of doing everything you can to set yourself up to have maximum flexibility and possibilities in your future. And so I guess a way that I would rephrase that is, I think a lot of people, because I see it across the gender divide now. I think that when I was a young associate, it was more, women wanting to have time with their kids. And now, which I think is a great development, I think now it's parents wanting to have time with their kids, or even people that are choosing not to have kids, wanting to have time to travel, etc. And I think there's a tendency to say no to the work, the traditional career, or to try really, really hard to protect this work life balance. And some of my greatest accomplishments and joys in my life are my career successes. I mean, my career is a big part of who I am. And I think most people that go to law school, there's a reason that you picked law and to go to law school. And I think we're too quick to sort of be frustrated that we have to work a night or a weekend. And um, I don't have any career successes that didn't come with burning the midnight oil, but that's where I learned so much in my career, where I grew so much in my career, where I was in the trenches with the people that I enjoy working the most with in my career. And so don't be so quick to judge the hard work as a negative.
Good rule to live by. Anything else that you want to throw out that we've not discussed here? I know we've touched a number of bases.
So I think my advice to the profession that we haven't talked about is, we did talk about unconscious bias, that there's still work to be done to better assist women and minorities in achieving their career goals, whatever it is. I find that a lot of those messages are directed to the women and the minorities themselves. And that we need to change. I mean, this has to be a conversation that is being had at all levels and with all people. It's easy to talk to women about what makes it hard to be a woman in the job, but we don't need to hear it so much. We know what's more important are the men who, not intentionally, but maybe unintentionally, are putting roadblocks up. For example, they aren't inviting the female associate to go have lunch. They're inviting the male associate to go have lunch. Their regular outings are golf, and even though the women are invited, none of the women golf, those sorts of things. And so these conversations need to be had everywhere. And they also need to be had in a way that the men feel supported, and that this is not, if, X gets a job, then I lose mine. There's plenty of room for all of us to succeed. It takes the same amount of hard work by all of us. And so that would be my big advice for kind of the next step, or I guess my wish is that we find a way to have that conversation where everybody is a part of it and everybody feels heard.
Courtney Ervin at Hicks Thomas, thank you so much for joining us. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Likewise, thank you for the opportunity.
Again, that was Courtney Ervin of Hicks Thomas LLP in Houston. You can visit hicks-thomas.com for more information about the firm. Make sure to like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and tune in next time to Keep It Legal. I'm your host, Mark Anik. We'll see you then.